Good.
See, the problem is these guys have seen this presentation about 14 times, so let me come up with punchlines before I get to I think so, it's dead up here, which is the story of my career. Okay, so while we're doing this, let me kind of learn the audience a little bit. How many people here have had to deal with a risk or crisis communication issue in the last year? Raise your hand. Okay. Keep your hand up for a second. How many of you people have sat down with the director of your agency and said, what keeps you up at night? Okay. Are you ready for those messages now? Do you have them? Are they in a book someplace? Because you know that these things only happen when you're on vacation, it's dark outside and raining. And if it's daytime, it seems like it's dark outside and it's raining when they occur. Okay. Help me for a second with the technology.
That clicker doesn't work.
That clicker doesn't work.
So the arrow keys will do it.
Okay. Okay, so the real question is, just what is risk? You know, you hear it used over and over again. What, you know, we talk about risk and crisis, so it's a threat to what we value. But more importantly, risk is actually hazard plus outrage. That's what risk really falls into. And the interesting thing is that the risk that harms people is really not often the risk that they're afraid of. We'll go into some samples in just a second. High risk, high hazard, low outrage. You have an apathetic audience. You have to, again, hold their attention, and the key message has to be interesting, okay? The example I have here is wear your PFD. How many people here have programs to get people to wear their PFDs? And yet they don't. And yet this is one of those things where sooner or later, if you spend enough time on the water, you're gonna fall out of that boat. Even good boaters, stuff happens. So this is one of those things where we really want them to do it, and yet they don't see, the public just doesn't see this as something that's of that concern. And then we get to moderate hazard and moderate outrage. This is one of those weird times when the only people you're really talking to in this case are the stakeholders. The people that are really involved in this thing. And they're the ones who want detail. They want to know everything you know about it, and they're going to tell you how they know more about it than you do. They want real detail. So be prepared to explain in very technical terms to this unique audience. I listed red tide offshore, okay? So there are discrete stakeholders who are really interested in red tide when it's offshore. When it comes inshore, there's a whole world of people who are interested in it. Low hazard, high outrage. Usually, they're going to be outraged at you. There's a core group of true believers who are really the ones that make the most noise, and everybody else just kind of steps back and goes, I'm going to wait and see how this shakes out to decide what side I'm going to be on. If you have public meetings about something that has low hazard but high outrage, be prepared to let people vent before they're going to listen to what you have to say. If you ever need some help in developing these public meetings, there's a gentleman named Paul Sandman, and if you look him up on Google, he's all over Google. His job for many years was to hold an annual meeting within the confines of the neighborhoods that lived around nuclear power plants. Now imagine, you've got a nuclear power plant, and then you've got all the people who live around the nuclear power plant. And they have to come in, and the power plant had to tell them what they're doing to protect them, what to do if the bad thing happens. These are traditionally high emotion kinds of meetings. Traditionally, they start with, I was here before that plant was, okay? What he found is that you really need to let people vent before they're even going to hear you about what you have to say. And some of it is just standing up there and taking it. I hear you, I understand, I hear what you're saying, before you can start telling them about what it is that here. The other thing that he proposed is that instead of having this kind of a meeting where all of the people are standing around, that you have one of those breakout meetings where you're in a large room and you have stations all around, and you have experts, subject matter experts at the stations, and people can wander around. It kind of breaks up that herd mentality when they really start getting after you. I was involved in a cancer cluster, pediatric cancer cluster in Palm Beach County many years ago. And the politicians decided we need to have a public meeting about this right now. I wasn't able to go. About halfway through the meeting, I got a phone call from the leader of that meeting saying, can you get us some security, because we're not going to be able to get to our cars from here. So be careful about public meetings. They get rowdy at times. High hazard, high outrage. Anybody here from Ohio? Raise your hand. Okay, you will know all about this. A couple of years ago, a gentleman who owned an exotic animal farm that had lions and tigers and bears, I believe it was in Zane, Ohio. Zanesville, Ohio, thank you. He decided one morning, I'm going to turn them all loose, and then I'm going to kill myself. And that's what happened. And there were lions and tigers and bears roaming around in the community. This is one of those real crisis communication moments. So, a couple of things. Number one, avoid over-reassuring people. That's really important in any kind of risk and crisis moment. Don't stand up and say, we've got this under control. We've got it taken care of. As soon as you do that, karma will get you. Trust me. Provide people with actions that they can do. It lowers the angst level. If in a real crisis moment, you give people things that they can do. I like to do the X, Y, and Z. Here's some X's, here's some things you have to do right now. In this case, it would be stay inside. There are lions and tigers and bears roaming your neighborhood. I have a feeling this was more in a rural setting, but I do know that there were some neighbors to these people who had some real problems about lions and tigers and bears. The second thing is, tell people things that they should do. And that might be, so first is, this is what you have to do. This is what you should do. Should do, go get the cats and dogs and bring them inside. And things that you can do. Continue to listen to the radio so that we can get information to you. If you give people things that they can do effectively, it lowers their angst level. It gives them a sense of they're regaining control of what's going on. So there are some obstacles to risk communication that are unique in risk and crisis communications. The first of it is the uncertainty. When these things happen, usually you don't get any warning. They just occur. And you have incomplete information, and you have a very complex situation going on. Very often, you're going to sit in a room with your boss and your boss's boss, and the first thing you're going to hear is, we're not going to say anything until we know all the details and can come out with everything. I don't want any half-baked statements coming out. That is absolutely the worst thing that you can do. Number one, it creates a void of information. Somebody else is going to fill that for you, and not necessarily with what you once said. Number two, it shows that you're not prepared. So whoever gets out there first with that information all of a sudden becomes the expert in this field. What you should do, what I recommend that you do, is to simply stand up and preface what you're saying. You've heard, the best in the world is the CDC for this, but you've heard people say, this is a very fluid situation. Things are going to change, and what I tell you now may not be accurate later, but here's what we know at this point. As soon as we have more information, I will come and give you that. That's really important. Some kind of flow of information at these moments. The other problem that you run into is when you have a multiple of experts out there, each one saying different things. Who do I believe? I'm the public. Who do I listen to? Perfect example. A couple of years ago, we had a really bad freeze in Florida. Really bad freeze for Florida. And somebody at FWC said, oh, well, you know, pythons, we probably lost half our population of pythons because of this really bad freeze. And we had people stand up in front of the media Well, naturally, the media wants to get the opposing side of this, so they went to the University of Florida, which has a big herpetarian group, and talked to one of the expert professors there who said, no, that's not exactly true. What the problem is now is the ones who survived are cold hardy, so they can go anywhere in the state that they want to. We had not reached out to those other people who might be asked also, and given them some information about what we're going to say and how they can be a part of that team. Selective reporting by the media, that's a workshop all under itself. You know that if they can find some way to make that headline just a little more onerous to you, they're going to do that if it'll sell more newspapers or get more viewers. That's their job. They are not our public relations firm. And that's really important for us to remember. They are not there for our public relations. You very rarely see the Miami Herald write a story that says there were no murders in Dade County today. That is not what you're going to see. So just keep that in mind. And then there are some psychological and social changes to how we receive and process information when we're really stressed. Now, I don't mean they ran out of my brand of Gatorade at the market. I mean really stressed. I worked an incident where Florida had one of the very few anthrax attacks in the country. In Lantana, Florida, had the Inquirer newspaper. They opened up an envelope and it had for real weaponized anthrax in it. The people who live around this community, around this building in Fort Lauderdale, were really stressed about that, as rightfully they should be. That's why I'm talking about people hear you and process things differently. We'll talk about that in just a second. The public, not only do they take information, process, and act on it differently, but the public perceives the success of your operation by the relevance of what you're telling them and the speed that you get it out to them. So what do we do about that? Well, one of the things is you sit down with your boss, and hopefully you can really sit down with your boss's boss. And I like the term, what keeps you up at night? What's that thing that worries you that you don't tell anybody? You can tell me because I'm the guy that's going to have to stand up in front of the media when it happens, and it will, and defend us, or tell people what they have to do. I promise we won't publish it. I promise we're not going to do anything with it, but we're going to get prepared for it. Tell me what the bad thing is that could be coming over the mountain. Sometimes you know these things, sometimes you don't. The other person that's really good to talk to is your Inspector General. And I know we all love talking to Inspector Generals, but if you have one in your agency or your division, sit down with them and say, what do you really see the risk to this agency? Because very often, part of their job is to do risk evaluations of things that are happening within your agency. They're a good source of information. What does the public want to know? This is so important, guys. They want to know what you know. They want to know they want to know what you know. Sometimes, we can't tell them that. I'm going to talk to you about panic in a minute, but it's, often in the heat of these crises, it's like, let's just give them a little bit of information. Tell them what you know. And they want information that will help them protect themselves, their families, and their pets. I said pets on purpose. Florida gets hurricanes, lots of them. We've had people die in their homes taking care of their pet because they would not evacuate, because there was not a pet-friendly place they could evacuate to. True story. So now Florida has shelters that are pet-friendly. People consider their pets like their family. Consider them in your process. Okay. How to build a plan that fails. I'm really good at this, I promise. Mixed messages from multiple experts. That would be when you're saying one thing and another agency is saying something else, and you've never taken the time to sit down ahead of time and say, what are we going to say? Since we both have kind of, sort of fingers in this pie, what are we going to say when the time comes? Information released late. This will kill you. Somebody else is coming out with stuff if you don't. Paternalistic attitudes. Don't worry, we've got this taken care of. They're there, don't worry. Not countering rumors and myths in real time. You know, you could take your entire staff and put them on nothing but watch the blogs and Facebook. And actually in federal, when there are federal crises, there are many people, that's their job. They monitor television, some monitor the radio, some monitor certain blogs and Facebook pages and things like that just to see what's coming out there. There are ways that you can use social media to your benefit, as well as ways that social media can hurt you really badly. So if you had a bear attack, you know that there are going to be some, you want to be on the Humane Society Facebook, on their Facebook and Twitter and blog pages. You want to be on the hunting Facebook and Twitter and blog pages. You know the places you need to be, and here's what I would suggest that you do. Build a web page, and it's your rumors and myths web page. And every time you see somebody say something that's absolutely absurd, right underneath that say, this is not really correct. Please go to our rumors and myths page, which is a web page that you've designed, and answer the question there. Don't answer it on Facebook. That answer on Facebook is going to disappear after a while. There's going to be 2 or 3 more rumors that come up at the same thing by sending people to this one Facebook page and re-upping it every time a new rumor comes out and keeping the old ones there. You can now show people, here's this list of myths that have been portrayed about this, and here's what the true story is about them. It's a single place that they can get information. It's good for the media, it's good for the public. Power struggles, public power struggles and conflict, and this is amongst elected officials. And you would think during the crisis this doesn't happen, but it does. I worked a hurricane one time where one community, one part of the state was hit by 5 hurricanes within 4 months, 5 months. And the Department of Health had some of these mobile health clinic vans. They had 2 of them, and they moved them into this area. And there were very often public fights amongst elected officials as to where those vans were going today. It just doesn't build credibility when you see that sort of thing happening. People don't want to pick one message out of many. It's not like a menu. They don't want many messages. They want the one that is important to them at that particular time. Even more important than that is, if somebody was just eaten by a bear, and you're standing up in front of the media, this is not to talk about a proposed bear hunt sometime in the future. Talk about what's going on then. Don't bring other things into it. Unofficial experts are going to pop up. You know they will. Sometimes you can recognize who they are ahead of time. If you can, that's great. Reach out to them ahead of time. But when you see somebody who's starting to get some traction, even if they're saying the opposite of what you're saying, reach out to them. Say, hey, I just wanted to give you the information that we're putting out so that you have everything that we know, since you're communicating to a broad part of our population. Sometimes it will bring them around a little bit to temper what they're saying. Sometimes they use it against you. That's what they do. And sometimes they'll become your support system. But you never know if you don't reach out to them. Don't ever tell a frightened person there's nothing to be frightened of. Don't tell people not to worry. Treat the public like intelligent adults. I very rarely use color. Tell them what you know that makes you less afraid. Why aren't you afraid about this situation? Tell them why. I can go back to, okay. We have pythons in Florida, lots of them in the Everglades. And how they got there is a long story that has many different beginnings, but we have a lot of pythons. We had a python roundup a couple of years ago, and people from all over the country came to the Everglades to capture pythons. Now, many of these people had never been in the Everglades before, and I could see no problem with that, to them roaming around trying to capture pythons, but I got a phone call from our tourism, the Visit Florida people, our tourism office, who said, you've got to stop this python thing. Why? We are losing German tourists daily. Why? In Germany, the public is saying when you step off of the airplane, there will be pythons everywhere. Okay. So we went to one of the German publications, I can't remember which one it was, that had a New York office, and I did a telephone interview with them about the python situation in Florida, and talked to them about, no, there aren't pythons at the international airport. They're all out in the Everglades, and you'll probably never see them out there, but that's the kind of thing you need to be careful of. Tell them why you're not afraid. The media will report rumors or hoaxes unless you quickly tell them why it's false. And it's really hard to get them to stop once they start. How many people here have ever asked for a retraction? Why? Doesn't really make any difference. I asked for them to change their archive. I don't care about that little 2-inch piece they're going to put on the bottom below the supermarket ad. I want them to change their archive, because in today's day, you've got reporters who have never done anything about conservation before that are going to show up at your door. And the first thing they're going to do is they're going to Google everything they can find about conservation. And if there's a story in there that's got wrong information in it, and it's in that archive, they're going to read it. And they're going to believe that that's true because it's there. Google said it is. So if you get into the rumor situation and you find that an outlet is pushing it, and you can convince them that it's not true, then see if you can talk them into removing it from their archive. Take it off your webpage. Get it out of the Google search system. Have an open and quick channel to communicate with the media. In Florida, we use GovDelivery. I don't know if you guys know anything about GovDelivery. It's a commercial email system. It works really, really well. Last I heard, maybe my friends who are still there can help, we had over 1 million email addresses in GovDelivery, Florida email addresses in GovDelivery. And when we send out a press release, we give people the opportunity to sign up for, I would like your press releases about freshwater fishing in our South region. And that's our promise, and we're only going to send you those. Now, those press releases don't have the PIO contact number and things like that on it, so that they're not covered up with, we send out thousands of these. But I pulled the numbers one time before a commission meeting when I had to make one of these presentations, and I found out that we're the largest circulating newspaper in the state of Florida. Because when we send out a press release to South Florida, we have over 300,000 people who get that press release. The largest circulating newspaper in Florida at the time was the Miami Herald, which only had 240-something thousand per day. So I like to tell people we're the largest publication in the state. You need some means that you can get information to the media quickly. However it works in your state, in your area, figure it out. The other thing I would recommend is that you do some desk visits with the media. And I know this is kind of scary now because you're actually going into their territory, but just go visit them where they work. Introduce yourself. Talk to the people that are in the newspaper and television station, the radio station, about you, what you do, give them your business card, and say, how do you want to get information from us? What's your deadline? We think we know the deadline, sometimes we don't. But just that personal contact will make a lot of difference later on. Partners need to have a clearly defined role and responsibility. Your partners, your state agency partners for sure. And the public needs to see a joint effort, a unified front when you are standing up talking about, everybody here works under Joint Information Centers, JICs. Everybody has gone through JIC training and stuff like that? Good, then I won't have to do a lot of that. The one thing I do want to remind you is, in a crisis situation, in an incident command situation, if you'll notice, the information officer reports directly to the incident commander. nobody else does other than safety. That shows you how important you are in this situation. That incident commander doesn't want your information filtered before it gets to him or her. So, you've got this moment where you have to stand up in front of the media during a risk or crisis and talk to them. What do? Well, express empathy early, only if you can. When you stand up in front of the media, or even worse, when you stand up in front of a community event and you go, our hearts and minds go out to the people who are affected by this. Point one, it doesn't work. If you can't really tell people how you feel about that, you really have empathy for them, don't. I use my grandkids all the time whenever kids are involved in these things. You know, it starts off with, I have grandkids who are about this age. I can't imagine the challenges and grief that you guys are going through right now. But having said that, let me give you information that will be useful to you as we move forward. You've got 30 seconds to win them over. Once you've done that, don't keep coming back to, we're so sorry this happened. It seems like it's just not real at that point. And if you really don't care, don't be the person standing up there talking, because it comes across very quickly and very easily. If you've got a director who is the worst public speaker you've ever run into, who you really don't want standing up there, convince him or her, this is not the time for you to be up there, I'll do it. Or somebody else can do it. The easiest way to do this is to bring back and show them some of their past participation in these things. It's not fair letting them go up there if they're not good at it. If they're not good, they need training, and you can do that for them. I've never met a division director, and I've worked with lots of state and some federal agencies, who you couldn't sit down with and say, I've got some skills that I can train you with that will make you much better in front of the media. They'll take it anytime you can do that. Find the time to do it. If you have a title or part of the official response, the public is going to assume you're competent until you prove them wrong. Once that happens, you're dead fish. You can never regain that again. Let me give you a good case in point. How many people here were involved in the BP oil spill? A handful of people at this side of the room, okay. If you'll recall, the main spokesperson for BP was the chairman of BP. And he was on the television every day talking about, we didn't spill that much oil in the water, there's oil in the water naturally, things like that for a very long period of time. In the back room, and I was involved in the back room of this on the public side of things, BP went through a different media relations company once every 30 days because they would tell them what to do and BP didn't do it because they didn't like that. So they would fire these guys until they could find somebody that would tell them how to do what they wanted to do their way. It didn't work for them. The chairman stood up one day and said to the public, I am so tired of this. I haven't had a vacation in 4 months. I haven't had a day off in 2 weeks. I want to see my kids. All right, who's got some questions for me? Okay. That was the second to last time you ever saw the chairman of BP on the air. The next time was when 60 Minutes found him in a regatta off the coast of England. And they filmed him, at the helm doing this. You can imagine what the text was about underneath that. BP chairman too busy to take care of his company's problems. So, be careful. Who else is probably one of the most important people to you in a risk and crisis moment that you rarely think of? I'll answer my own question. Who answers the phone in your office? Your main office. If you call the secretary, who answers the phone? When the bad thing happens, do you sit down with that person and say, here's what you need to say? I have been burned so many times by somebody that they just happened to call and talk to, they being the media, before they got to the communications office, that I learned, make sure you know who's going to be fielding these calls and make sure that those telephone people have the information that they need. In our regional offices, we We have centers where there are people who take calls. And it's very common for us to send the same talking points that we send to the public information officers to these regional offices so that they have that information too, because they are the voice of your agency. Be careful that they have the information that they need. Okay. I know if you've had a bad thing happen at your agency and you sat in a room, you've heard this, we can't tell them that because they will panic. Could be CWD. All the hunters in the world are going to go berserk if you tell them what CWD could do, or that it's in the state next to them and they didn't know about it. It could be anything. Information is empowering. Panic is one of those things that's been studied academically for a long time, and there are very few documented cases of people panicking, just running amok in the city. There are, however, lots of cases of people doing what they think they need to do for self-preservation because they don't have the information that you have. And when we, the keepers of this information, look at them and go, oh, look at what they're doing, that's because they don't know what makes you not afraid. They're acting on the information that they have at hand. So information is empowering. Uncertainty is more difficult to deal with than knowing that a bad thing is about to happen or has happened. And if you don't tell them what's going on, somebody else will. I've harped on this a lot of times. That reporter who calls you and go, oh, I don't want to talk to him, I'm going to put him off. Maybe he won't call back. He's calling somebody else. And he's going to talk to the people who really want to tell him the inside story. So don't do that. People revert to more instinctual fight or flight reaction if they don't have information. What you perceive as panic is because you have information that the public does not. The anthrax attack is a perfect example of this. I worked for the Department of Health when this occurred. The Department of Health in Florida was the agency that would manage this. And we were putting out all kinds of information about what to do to protect yourself, your family, washing your clothes, things like that if necessary. And then the feds came and they said, thou shalt not speak again. On penalty of law and imprisonment, thou shalt not speak again, because this is a Homeland Security event now. So we didn't, and neither did they. And the angst in that community rose to the level that people had literally started a fund to burn the building because they had heard that that's what you have to do with anthrax. You have to burn the place. Not having information is really a bad thing. Give people things to do. I talked about this earlier. Things that you must do, things that you should do, and things that you can do. That's 3 things, and that's going to be critical to us later on in my presentation. 3 things, okay? If you're the spokesperson, stay in your lane. If you are the conservation expert and somebody asks you a question about financing, no, I don't have that information, but I can get it for you. What I can tell you today is, I'm a strong believer in the no but. Anytime you tell a reporter no, tell them what you can tell them. No, I can't tell you that. But what I can tell you is, and then give the information that you have. Tell the truth. You know, I give risk and crisis communication workshops that are much more than an hour long on a regular basis, and the first thing I usually do is stand up and say, listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Tell the truth, tell it all at once, and tell people how to protect themselves, their family, and their pets. That's it. Good night, we're done. That is risk and crisis communication. It's hard to do it though. It's hard to tell the truth when it maybe doesn't look great for you. Or it's hard to tell the truth when you're having to say, we were not expecting this, we're not prepared, but we're doing the best we can for you at this moment. And you don't really have to say it that way. But it's even harder to tell the truth when you should have been prepared. You should have known this was coming, and you didn't, because there's going to be people out there who will remind you of that on a regular basis. Follow up on issues. If you tell a reporter, I'm going to have something to you this afternoon, don't send an email to the subject matter expert who's got the information. And when the reporter calls back and says, where's the stuff? You go, well, I sent an email, he hasn't responded to me yet. Pick up the phone. Even worse than that, I've seen people email people in the office next to them. Pick up yourself, walk to the office and talk to the person. Follow up on issues. That reporter has an editor who's walking into his office or her office and saying, what about that fish and wildlife story? Well, I'm still waiting for them to come back with a detail on so-and-so. We don't have any more time, go with what you got now. That means you were just written out of that story. Simply because, and okay, we all know that you can say, I'll have it to you by 2 o'clock, and at 2 o'clock, you don't have it. Or you know you're not gonna have it. Call the reporter and say, hey, this is taking longer than I thought. It's gonna be tomorrow. Now you may hear something like, I'm sorry, we've gotta go. At least then you can be prepared. Or you may hear, okay, I'll tell my editor we're gonna do this tomorrow. Don't keep them in the dark. And the final thing here is expect criticism. This is not so much for you, but to prep your boss. If you're the spokesperson in a crisis moment and you're not being criticized, you're not doing enough out there. It's just that simple. People will disagree with you, and that's okay. People are going to criticize what you're doing, how you're doing it, how fast you're doing it, and that's okay. You just keep giving out information as it evolves. Okay, reporters are people too. They have different levels of experience and competence. Some of them have personal agendas. How many people here went to journalism school? Okay, did you ever hear of heroes and villains? That used to be the mantra at journalism schools. There is always a hero and a villain in every story. Now, in some cases, the hero is the reporter, uncovering the ne'er-do-well. You don't want to be the villain. So make sure you get information in there, because if you don't, you could be couched in that situation. The other thing to keep in mind is, and I said this earlier, we used to have conservation outdoor reporters and conservation reporters and things like that. They're getting to be rarer, if that's a real word. What you find now is you've got some general reporter who is driving down the road, got a phone call from his editor, and said, somebody was swallowed by a python. Go over to FWC and do a story on it. So if there's somebody else in the car, that reporter is literally Googling python eating and getting as much information as they can before they get there. Be careful that you don't fall into the trap of trying to educate this reporter. That's not your job. Your job is to get your side of the story out. We're going to talk about that in just a second. Emotionally charged questions. Are you ready for them? You know what they are. You've seen them 1,000 times. How many teenagers have to die parasailing before you're going to do something about it? How do you like that question after 2 teenagers die falling off of flying into a building and then falling into a parking lot? Or, on law enforcement officers, how does it make you feel when you see a boating accident like this where people have probably died? Or, and I actually saw this on Facebook, on one of these interviews, do you really think you're worth your salary? What a great question. Be prepared for these. You know how to bridge. Everybody knows what bridging is. You know how to get away from these things. Use it. False negative questions. Isn't it true that the lack of enforcement causes injury? Never repeat negative statements. Okay, I'll tell you why. Isn't it true that the lack of enforcement causes injury? No, it's not true that the lack of enforcement causes injury. Now, if I'm in radio or television, I gotcha. What'd you just say? The lack of enforcement causes injury. If I'm in the newspaper, that's a different story. But never repeat negative questions. Guarantee questions. Now that the panther's been caught, can you guarantee that the residents are safe? Of course not. But you're going to hear those things on a regular basis. And what if questions, usually the worst scenario. What if a hurricane comes while there's BP oil in the bay? This is a real question I got while working at the Emergency Operations Center during the height of the BP oil spill. I had been there for 2 shifts. I was a little cranky. a reporter that I knew pretty well called up and said, hey, there's a huge oil slick in the bay. And this is hurricane season. So if a hurricane comes up into the Gulf, would it pick up the oil and drop it off somewhere inland? I said, I'm sorry. I've got more important things right now. Let me give you the key points that we're doing right now. And come on, I'm really tired. At the end of all of these 12-hour cycles, you have, the hot wash where here's what happened today and here's what we did. So I'm sitting there, and at one point, the scientists are talking about their stuff, and all the ESF sections are talking about their stuff. And I said, you would not believe the question I got today. Bill from the Tampa Bay Times called and said, hey, is it possible that, a hurricane could pick up this oil and drop it off in the bay? And one of the scientists in the back room said, yeah, we're a little worried about that. He said, oh, great. Do you think you'll let us know about that, maybe? Be careful about the worst case scenarios. This is basic stuff, and I hope you guys don't take it as I don't think you know it, but I think in risk and crisis it's important to go back to some of the basics again. Interviews are opportunities. Don't look at them with dread. It's your opportunity to deliver your story, and it truly is choreographed. It's like a dance. If you don't know the steps to the dance, you may step on your toes or somebody else's. But it is not your opportunity to convince that reporter just how very smart you are. Okay? And if you have subject matter experts, that's the worst. If you have scientists who are trying to talk to this reporter and tell them just how smart they are, that's not the guy you want in front of them. It's not an intellectual exercise, it's not a debate, it's not an emotionally charged, or even more important, it's not a friendly chat. How many people remember Katie Couric and Sarah Palin walking down a dirt road in Alaska? And Katie, bless her heart, we can say that in the South, is talking to the governor and saying, so governor, where do you get your information from? And the governor says, well, I read newspapers and things like that. And Sarah says, and Katie says, what newspapers do you read? And the governor had a hard time enumerating the newspapers that she read. Now, who here thinks that Katie just thought that up on the spur? Nope, you're right. It later came out that staff had told her, some of the governor's staff had told her, we give her the clips, but she never looks at them. That became a campaign item for the rest of that campaign. So it is not a friendly chat. I used to wear an FWC shirt every day to work. It had our logo on it. And I wore an ID around my neck that had my name in big bold letters. And I shopped at Publix, grocery chain. I can't tell you how many times I've been stopped in Publix and somebody says, oh, do you work for FWC? Now the smart butt in me would like to say, no, I just like their shirts. But yes, I do. And then it's generally a law enforcement question. My brother got arrested for catching so-and-so, and I'm sorry, I am not in law enforcement, but if you'll give me your brother's name and telephone number, I'll have him call you. And that usually stops the conversation right there. Just remember, be careful, those very, very insignificant moments can be very important. I have no idea who I was talking to. I don't know if that person is a senator, a reporter, or just some guy that's interested in information. Your job is to give the reporter your story. Go into the interview with your own agenda. Commit your message to memory. Now, I'm not talking about robotic, but I want you to have your key points to where you know what you're going to say before you say it. Return to your message consistently. If the key point of your entire message is that we do not have CWD in Florida, but we have closed our borders to protect the wildlife in Florida, every time you finish a statement with that reporter, I want you to say, and you know that we do not have CWD in Florida, but we're working to protect the people of Florida. Repeat it, repeat it, repeat it, and be confident you're the expert. You can anticipate 95% of the questions you're going to be asked by a reporter. I know you can. You do it all the time. If you sat down in a room, you could write out almost all of the questions you're going to be asked by this reporter. What I want you to do is when you're writing those down and you get to the one, oh God, please don't let him ask me this question. That's the one I want you to prepare for. The others you know off the top of your head. This one's going to take a little bit longer, and there is karma, like I said before. That will be in his interview, I guarantee it. In a real crisis, you will likely get the question, who's responsible, and what are you going to do about it? Okay, be prepared for that. Okay, we just did this. It's not about the red light. If you're in the room with a reporter, if you're in the room with a camera, if you're in the room with the setup crew, you're on camera. You're being recorded. Just plan on being recorded. My goal was I would meet the reporter in the parking lot and walk them to wherever we were going to go. And then when we were done, I would have small talk with them as they're leaving and walk them out to their car and wave to them as they left. Because one time I didn't do that. I was really busy. My principal had an interview. I stood around. Interview was done. He did great. He had to leave. I said, you guys good? You know your way out? Absolutely. You know what they did? They wandered around the building with their camera interviewing people. So what do you think about the budget this year? It's their right. It's a state building. It's not like it's, protected people. Walk them out. You're on the record. When people are stressed, they will remember the first thing you tell them and the last thing you tell them. And everything in between is Charlie Brown. Okay? So when you build your message map, which we'll talk about, or your key points, make sure that the first thing and the last thing you tell them are the most important thing that you want them to remember. If you have to tell them the bad news, reinforce it with 3 good things. This is not my stuff. This is data that comes from real live work in the field, real live peer review stuff. Most of this, or a lot of this, is from a gentleman named Vince Cavello, Dr. Vince Cavello. If you don't know him, look his stuff up on the web. He was a mentor of mine over many, many years, and he is the best at risk and crisis communication. If the world catches on fire, you will find Vince in the background whispering in somebody's ear, here's how to put it out. So, avoid absolutes, avoid repeating untrue negatives or false allegations, and balance bad news with good, positive, constructive messages, which would be something like this. No, we have not captured the bear yet, but we have 6 traps put out. We have 24-hour-a-day surveillance on those traps, and our law enforcement officers have flooded the area and will remain here until we do. Don't just say, no, we haven't captured the bear. Okay? I don't know. That's okay. If you get a question from a reporter and you cannot answer it correctly, just say, I don't know. I can't answer. I wish I could answer that. And then tell them why you don't know, you can't answer, or you wish you could answer that question. It may be something like this. I don't know the individual's name, and if I did, I can't give it to you because state law prohibits me from giving out that information. Or I can't give you that information now because it's an active investigation. What I can tell you is, though, and then give them what you can tell them. Indicate your follow-up. I will be back here in 4 hours with an update. Please be back there in 4 hours with an update, or you will lose what credibility you have. One more thing, and I just thought about it as we're standing here. If there's a really big event taking place, somebody got eaten by a bear, and you set up your command trailer, you've got it out there, and it's got all your logos and stuff on it. Very often, the media will set up their cameras hours before the press conference is taking place. And the podium is there, and all their microphones are there, and the cameras are over here, and there's nobody standing by the cameras. It's being web streamed live. Guarantee it. And for whatever reason, that podium attracts people to come up there and talk about things. Hey, did you hear we haven't found the bear yet? Yeah, we're never gonna find that bear. It happens. Be careful. Those microphones are live. Okay. I don't know if you have them on your desk. You have a template for a message map. I have a favorite phrase of mine, and that's, it's a career-altering moment. This is something that has helped me keep my job for 40 years. And there have been several moments where it was questionable. So, how much time do I have?
You got 15.
15 minutes? Great, okay. Right after 9/11, and you all know the story about the Crisis Command Center for 9/11. Everybody knows what happened there? I see, no, okay, I'll give you that story. About 2 years before 9/11, Mayor Giuliani went out to his risk and crisis command team, his incident command team, and said, I want you to do some planning for the worst things that can happen to the city. Let's just get prepared. And they did this on a regular basis. They go, oh, sure. And one of the things that they came up with was a fire in a high-rise skyscraper. Okay. So they had this book all planned out, fire in a skyscraper. Who knows where the incident command office is for New York City? In the bottom of Tower 2. Everybody, the entire senior command for incident command structure in New York City was killed at 9/11 when the tower came down. There's an iconic picture of Mayor Giuliani walking down the street with his horde of people on both sides of him. And he's got a purpose, you know, and he's walking down the street. They were looking for a place to set up an office. And they found a restaurant that they could come into and set up and use as their office. So he did a remarkable job, but he was helped out by the fact, I don't want to take anything from how he managed that event because it was remarkable that he could stand up and answer the questions that he did, but there was planning ahead of time that he was able to rely on, sort of, because there was no senior staff whispering in his ear at that moment. Right after 9/11, the feds decided we've got to have a better way of giving out information to the public during a crisis. So they reached out to Vince Cabela, who at the time was one of the lead professors at Columbia University in New York City in the School of Journalism. If you know schools of journalism, you know that Columbia is one of the top 3. And they said, I want you to come up with a plan to where we can communicate with the public in these times of true crisis better than we have. I said, okay. So the first thing that they did is he hired a slew of graduate assistants. And they looked at every press conference that took place within a 100-mile radius of New York, which covers an awful lot of major metropolitan cities. And they transcribed everything that was said at the podium. Imagine the volume of this. And then they went to all of the newspapers and television stations and radio stations in those major markets, and they transcribed all of the news that they put out during that period of time. They correlated what was said at the podium between what was reported on the air by the reporters. So they said, we have found a dynamic where I think we can design your message so that reporters will use it. Isn't that what you want? As opposed to putting out your message that reporters don't want. What he found is that you've got 27 words, 9 seconds, 3 messages. That's it. 27 words. If you break that down, that's 9 words per key point that you can say in about 9 seconds. When I started doing this stuff, and a client would come to me and say, how long do you think my interview will be? I say, oh, you might have, it's going to be, a 2-minute package. You might have 30 seconds in there. Now you've got 9 seconds, and while that's going on, you've got something across the bottom about what the stock market is doing, and something over here about what the weather is doing. So you've got to be really on task. Oops, wrong button. Okay, can you read this? This is a message map that I built early in the CWD scare, and Florida was making some early plans. I didn't build this. Our subject matter experts built this. I just helped them build it. This is one of those moments where you buy pizza, lock the door with them in the room and say, we're going to do this before we leave. The way you use this is, the top 3 boxes is your key point. That's the quote that you want to be on the air. To the question, what does FWC propose to keep Florida's deer safe? Our quote would be this: there is no cure for CWD, no preventive vaccine, and no way to test live deer to see if they're infected. Florida deer do not currently have CWD. Closing the border is currently the most effective method of keeping Florida deer infection-free. That's our message back then. That was our message at that point. That's 9 seconds if I had practiced for a moment. And I would repeat that until that reporter was tired of me saying that to him. Because that's what I want him to get on the air. How many times have you had people that you prepped come to you and say, interview went great. Oh good, I'm glad to hear that. And then the next day they call you, why did he use that? That wasn't important. Why didn't he do this? But I told him, why did you say it? If it's not important, you don't want him to use it, why do you say it? Okay, if you look below, column key message 1, I just told you that there is no cure for CWD. The next 3 statements are used to prove that. Prove it to me. The way you use this is, if you have some more time, your next statement would be, you know, I told you that there was no cure for CWD. It's transmitted by direct contact with bodily fluids or contact with contaminated environments. Deer do not pass CWD to humans, and USDA oversees and regulates the interstate transport of deer. That would be a statement that I could give that we're comfortable with that goes out. I know you're looking at this and you're going, oh yeah, this is simple. You bring your subject matter experts together and say, we've got to do this in 27 words, and they're going to say, that's not possible. There is no way. All you need to do is keep saying, how would you explain this to your grandchild or an 8-year-old? Because that's who you're talking to. I'll tell you one more doc story. I teach by things I did. I got out of the Army, I went back to Florida State University. At that point, if you worked for Florida State University, you could take 2 classes, a semester, a trimester, whatever the process was at that point. I needed a physics class. I'm not a mathematician and I'm not a physics person, but I needed to have one at like after 5 o'clock. So I looked through the catalog and I found one that was at 6 o'clock, 6 to 7 o'clock basic physics, and the instructor was pediatric. And so I go to my advisor. We used to actually have to take a paper to an advisor, and I say, hey, here's my schedule. And he looks at it and he says, you've got Paul Dirac as an instructor? I said, yeah, that's what it says right there. He said, do you know who Paul Dirac is? I said, no, never heard of him before. He said, well, he is a Nobel laureate in physics who's likened to Einstein and Newton. I said, oh, great. And I said, well, what's his class going to be like? He said, good luck. Okay, so I'm an adult. I've been in the Army and stuff like that. So I said, I'm going to go talk to this professor. So I make an appointment and go see Dr. Dirac. And I said, Dr. Dirac, I need to get out of your class. He said, why? Paul Dirac at that point was like an 85-year-old English professor who had family that lived in Tallahassee, so they said, hey, I think I'll go over to Florida State and teach some classes. And they were thrilled to have him because now they could claim a Nobel laureate on their campus. But he was literally pipe, suede coat, leather armband, stuff like that. And he said, well, why do you want out of my class? And I said, I'm not a physics major, I'm not a math major. I'm afraid your class is going to be too advanced for me. And he stopped and he said, let me give you some sage advice, young man. He said, people who truly know their field can make very complex things very simple to understand. It's those people who really don't know their field that hide behind jargon and confusion. You'll do fine in my class. Okay. I have used that quote 1,000 times with subject matter experts. Let me tell you the story about Paul Dirac. Now, I'm sure that we can do this together and form this agreement as to how we can get these 27 words together. The end of the story is I show up in the class, and there's a graduate student teaching it, but his name was on it. Okay, so, to increase your effectiveness, speak in clear, brief sentences, give succinct messages, use media-friendly language, speak visually, creating mental pictures. Everybody close your eyes. Imagine a room with 1 million basketballs in it. Got that? Okay, now imagine a room with 1 billion basketballs in it. You can't do that. But if there's an oil spill in the Gulf, and I tell you 20,000 gallons of oil spilled into Tampa Bay, that's about as many gallons as would fill a home swimming pool, you got an idea about what I'm talking about. Make sure you put context into things when you give out things like that. Bridge. What I'm really here to talk to you about is, or what I use more than anything else is, the most important point is, I say that because particularly with television and radio, very often that reporter is not actually putting the package together, they're giving it to somebody else. That editor will go through that video very quickly, at like 3 times fast when they first get it, just fast enough that they can hear the words that kind of like chipmunk sound, but they can see the visuals. As soon as they come to that point where they hear the most important thing to remember is they're going to stop the video and listen to what it is. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I was an editor at one point, it always worked with me, so I figured it works with everybody. Never repeat negative language. Deliver only your side of the story. Your job is not to say, well, of course the Humane Society disagrees with us, but no. Let that reporter go talk to the Humane Society. Don't debate other points of view. Reporters will always do this. Well, I interviewed the Humane Society, I'm picking on them, and I shouldn't. I interviewed the hunters, and they said that you were being very unfair because you didn't give them more access. Don't argue with them, talk about what you are doing. Pause and give thoughtful, positive responses. That's a pause. Here's what happens. You prep for this meeting, for this interview. The reporter's asking you a question. You hear half of it. You know what the rest of that question is going to be, so you start thinking about your answer so you can just jump on it and give them that answer and show just how good you are at this. And the question goes into a direction that you really weren't planning, and you sound like a fool when you come out with your answer. You can pause, take a question, pause. Now, pause is not concern about a stroke, but pause is just take a beat, think about what you're going to say, and say it. If it's on television or radio, they're going to take the pauses out. If it's a newspaper reporter, I guarantee you he's not sitting there going, pause. Just, it's your interview. You run that interview. Don't let the reporter do it. I'm doing this as quick as I can. There are no off the records. I can tell you ugly stories about when I did this and I shouldn't have. There are no off the records. Message map. Here's what I'd like you to do. We don't have time to do it now, so here's what I'm proposing. I want you to find one controversial thing that you work with. One of those things that you wish, please, God, don't let him ask this question. And I want you to build a message map for it. Okay? And then I want you to email it to me. And I will go through it and send you back some notes. If it needs it, I'll say, good job, use this one. My email is very simple. It's doc@kokolandassociates.com. KOKOLANDASSOCIATES.com. You can scan it, send it to me. I'll turn it around and get it back to you. Please, please, please remember these message maps. You can use them for things that you aren't even thinking about. Now, when you have that public meeting that you have to go to, you can prep with this as well. And they're really good for prepping people that you have to put in front of the camera. When your secretary doesn't know anything about something and you've got 10 minutes to do it before the reporter shows up, this is how you do it. Okay, so you represent your agency and you may be the first or the only voice that the public hears. So review your key messages, organize your thoughts, go through this list, and then at the very bottom, don't argue with anyone who buys ink by the barrel or videotape by the case. Okay? Do I have any questions? Yes, sir.
Hi. Your timing's perfect because beginning next week, probably everyone in the room. I can't use my broadcast boards.
From the diaphragm.
Yes. Next week, it'll probably be in the national news, I suspect. We've been preparing for a pending crisis in Hawaii for about 6 months, so a lot of your advice are things we're already doing, but the one thing that's come up in the past 24 hours, which has taken me away from the conference quite a bit, is preparing for a media pool. And having been a longtime member of the media, I never liked pools a whole lot, especially if you're one of the people who didn't get picked for the pool. Just any advice or tips? I've already done the plan this morning. It's been set up.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, thank you.
I have one real important one. Don't forget your local guys when the national people come in.
And actually, the local guys get preference. We've already.
Good,
yeah.
because they're with you throughout. The other thing is, make sure that you're following how that pool is actually disseminating the information.
Yep.
Games are played,
Yep.
you know that as well as I do. And if you find some locals that are really being cut out of this thing, I've got no problem with calling them.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I can tell you. I know that you've got a pool sometimes because you just can't have the gaggle in there with you, but the other thing is, after the pool is gone, go ahead and have the opportunity for the local folks too,
Yeah.
just for them.
Yeah.
I've seen so many times that you have the big event, Katie Kirk comes in and everybody goes, "Oh, Katie's here," and then Katie leaves, and the locals go, "Yeah, you forgot about us, didn't you?" So that would be my advice.
Yeah, I was a local TV reporter for many years. And
You know,
whenever
it's tough to be stepped
the
on.
networks flew in, it just, we hated it.
Yep.
Absolutely hated it. Thank you.
Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
As communicators, like you said, I think we're pretty comfortable with giving the media the information that we have right now, or so far. However, we work for an agency where all of our administration pretty much is a scientist by trade, and they're very methodical and very slow, and they like in theory the idea of being quick and responsive. But then when we're actually in the midst of it, it's like, well, by Friday we'll have this report done. By Friday we will have tested all of the water quality. And these are my bosses, my boss's bosses, and it's a tough sell sometimes. What is your advice?
My advice is, after these events, have what's called a hot wash, to where you can actually bring these people back into the room, and everybody has to come with 3 things that went well and 3 things that did not go well, that need improvement. Everybody that walks into that room, and this is like in hospital risk management, they have these where nobody has rank in these meetings. It's not there to find fault with a person, it's there to find fault with the system, okay? Make that very clear when you go in. We're not looking to pick on anybody. We're trying to find out, what are we doing that's not working well? And in that process, you can probably build in, we had this 3-day delay. During that 3-day delay, this is what occurred in the media. We were not able to overcome that because it had become public. It was then believed that that's what's happening. That's the best advice I can give you for something like that. Show them real world examples of what happened after. You're not gonna be able to fix this. Look, I've done this in the private sector, which is much easier, because you're in a room and the attorney is sitting over here and saying, you can't say anything at all because you're gonna be sued. And I'm there saying, if you don't say something, you're not gonna have a company that's gonna be sued. So you can't do that, but you can after that event, because they're gonna come. And then what you can do is, so here's what I propose. We need to list the top 3 things that our agency is at risk for. And then, in concert with you, we're going to come up with generic 3 answers to these questions that we can keep aside. We're not going to give them to the public. It may be a public record, but if you don't tell them it's there, we're going to make these 3 records, and then we're just going to hold them on the side. I would go to the extent of actually building web pages and just keeping them dark until you need them, so that you at least have the template, and you can fill in the things that you need other than that. If you do it where it seems like a collegial thing, where they're not being rushed in the process, you may be able to, at that moment when it really happens, say, we've got 99% of this, all I need is the number of particles per million that's in the water now. Can you give that to me? Everything else you've already approved. That might help. Okay, anybody else? Well, thank you all very much. I appreciate your attention. And if there's anything I can do, please let me know.
So next